Got a couple of questions from our audience today. Paul, this first one, it dropped in during one of your segments, but Gunjan, you're more than welcome to give your insight as well. But Paul, how many CAM sort of policies or programs should one have, and how often should your CAMs be reviewed? Would it be a case of reviewing them every audit period, or would you prefer, or would it be best practice for a shorter time frame to review CAMs?
Thanks, Andy. So how often should the programs be refreshed? I think that was one of the questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, just with consistent with any policy that you have or program that you have at the firm level, you monitor it periodically to assess whether there are changes that need to be made to your methodology, tools, templates, practice aids, right? I think it's important with the implementation of the new standard to establish a baseline in the first place to make sure it's consistent with the new standard, and then make things available to your teams to make sure there's a consistent approach in line with the standard, as well as giving them tools and templates and practice aids that are practical that they can use to apply the standard. But again, once you establish the baseline, you can then monitor that program just like you would any other QC process or program on a periodic basis and make changes to it as you learn things as time passes.
Yeah, I would concur with that. I think a good aspect, an aspect of any good quality control system is it has an inbuilt self-monitoring approach that's in there, that you monitor the results of the practice aids and policies and procedures you put out. And if those are not getting you the desired results, you revisit and see what tweaks are needed to get to the point that you aim to get to.
Right, because there will be lessons learned as you go through, and as you are in the tranches. So as you learn those lessons, you can definitely enhance your programs as you learn about those. Back to you, Andy.
Thank you so much. And on the subject of effective programs, when it comes to establishing an effective QC program, what have you both noticed in your expertise areas that are commonly overlooked when it comes to setting up an effective QC program?
I would say that this is with respect to CAMs. I'm not sure if it's with respect to CAMs question or broader than that. With respect to CAMs, it's still pretty early on. But there are some observations that the PCAOB has made that I referred to, and I think if you go to that document on our website, it will list out other observations that they had based on the early adopters of the standard, the larger accelerated filers, with the year ends of June 30th, 19. If it's a broader question on QC, I think what a lot of firms are missing, or where they can enhance the programs, is the monitoring aspect. So once you develop, whether it's a CAM-related QC program or process, or another QC process, I think once you establish it, you need to monitor its effectiveness. Whether the people will use it and how they use it, and if there's a template or a tool that was developed, are your audit teams actually using them, and then having a feedback loop back to enable to change. If there are changes that need to be made to the program based on that feedback loop from the audit practice, then you can enhance your programs. But I would say the monitoring aspect is something that sometimes gets overlooked, but I think it's critical.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And sorry to interrupt. One of the things. Thanks. One of the things I did want to point out is from a QC perspective, specific to CAMs. One of the bigger observations that came out, and this is, I'm pivoting a little bit towards the key audit matters here, which are the equivalent, or at least equivalent and objective, to CAMs, but for international jurisdictions. One of the biggest observations that came out was that the CAMs say, how the auditors, the key audit matters, similar to the critical audit matters, they say what the auditors have done to address those, but when a lot of the regulators went in and looked at the work papers, they found out that the audit firms had actually not performed those procedures. So what was disclosed in the auditor's report as if they did 5 procedures to address those scams, they probably only did 3, but they said they did 2. So I think there's a review process for a lot of those firms that was lacking, either from their partner or EQR or any other perspective, or maybe they needed another CAM reviewer perspective. But that was one of the things that was noticed. Paul and I were in certain foreign jurisdictions that recently where we had looked at that, and they had similar issues. So it's not an uncommon problem. So I think in the US we should be very careful about that too, from a building or QC perspective.
Thank you so much. And Gunjan, a quick question for you. Oh, sorry, Paul. Do you have anything to add?
No, the other thing other than the monitoring that I would say, and also adding on to, in addition to what Gunjan shared from the international perspective, I'd also highlight what we talked about in the presentation today from a QC perspective, which is the communication to the practice. So your QC programs are only as good as as you communicate them to people and people actually use them. Okay. Sorry, Andy, get back to you.
Not a problem. Thank you so much. And Gunjan, another quick question here. Dropped in during your segment, but Paul, you're always welcome to give your insight too. But Gunjan, you mentioned there's a potential impact on communications when it comes to CAMs between audit committees and investors. How do you mitigate, or can you suggest any strategies to effectively mitigate the impact on communications? Is it a case of just remaining transparent, maintaining regular communication, or is there anything more specific that you would suggest?
And just a clarification on the question, is that communications between the auditors and management?
Yes, I think that's what the question's getting to.
Yeah, so I think that's a very important question, because one of the things people were afraid about was what was called the chilling effect, saying that because now the auditor can write something which management does not control, it's going to decrease communication. But if you look at the intent of the standard, and if the auditor is having open and honest communication, and as we've seen in the dry runs, the way to be successful in this is it's still owned by the auditor. It is the auditor's responsibility, but no one likes surprises. So as long as the audit committee and management is fully aware, for them also it is nothing, not an item which they're not aware of, because that's where it starts from. It starts from items which were have been or should have been communicated to the audit committee. And secondly, these are the areas where the auditor has spent a lot of time. So from a management perspective, there shouldn't be any surprises. But I would say take everyone along, early on, and have open, honest discussions. So we haven't heard of cases where this has really hampered communications. If anything, it has actually improved communications. In the U.S. specifically, even I think back in 2017, ICAEW in the UK, they did another study of the effects of the key audit matters, and one of the effects they found was actually enhanced communication. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. I think the key is to be upfront and discuss things openly and address any concerns and questions upfront.
Thank you so much. And we've got one more question here before we look to wrap things up today. And this is for both of our panelists. What resources are available on more in-depth discussions regarding CAMs?
Yeah, so I can, just really quick, I might have mentioned this during my presentation. I think a great resource that people can go to if they want to learn more about CAMs, the lessons learned. The PCAOB has a different step guidance that it issued and other documents and presentations that have uploaded on their website. So if people go to the PCAOB website, and then they click on standards, and then they click on implementation of PCAOB standards and rules. And after that, they click on that new audited report. There's the whole page, whole portal that's set up by the PCAOB with CAM-specific guidance from the regulator.